There aren't too many sacred cows that WWE are still yet to slaughter, but their self-titled biggest party of the summer remains alive and well. Once cherished concepts like babyface selling opening promos and just literally having a tag division have all been ground up into corporate branded mints, dangerously undercooked then served cold at live events. But just the mention of SummerSlam is still something to be salivated over. Basically, in an age of WWE shows being quite bad, SummerSlam is still quite good, and this is a positive video. But still, for all its rich lineage of doing things right, it does still have some major questions hanging over it. WrestleMania is all about ending feuds, and while its sister show often does the same, those that run the entire year need to pass through it with a major narrative twist or just use it to begin in earnest. And that's not to even mention the numerous acts of God which often seem drawn to this particular show like a proverbial moth to an inflamed muscle injury. My name is Adam Cleary, and these are the 10 biggest what-if moments in SummerSlam history. Number 10, what if we'd actually got the Summer of Punk 2011? Ah yes, in July 2011, CM Punk won his first WWE Championship in the midst of a program that felt like it was going to change the company forever. After blurring the lines with his corporate shredding pipe bomb promo, a restless crowd that was sick to the back arse of Cena's invincibility and the office that imposed it saw their wildest dreams come true in Chicago. The company they finally thought had listened. After returning to Raw following a whopping, let me just check my notes here, 1 week away, he was put into a winner-takes-all match with John Cena for the now disputed belt, with Triple H suddenly inserted as a guest referee. Now, despite actually winning the match, albeit in a way that protected John Cena, he was attacked by, let me just check my notes again, Kevin Nash of all people. He dropped the championship to a cashing in Del Rio, which all somehow led to a Night of Champions match with Triple H, which he lost. By October's Hell in a Cell, he was in a triple threat match with Cena and Del Rio, which he also lost, and November saw him tagging with Triple H to face Miz and R-Truth, which, and you're not going to believe this, he lost. By the time he finally regained the title later that year, the magic had well and truly faded, and over the next year, John Laurinaitis would wrestle as many pay-per-view main events as Punk did. Nope, you heard me. It's oversimplifying this drastically, but if they just allowed Punk to return as champion at the height of his popularity, the critical and commercial windfall of those ensuing title defenses would have led to Vince genuinely seeing his worth. Sadly, with Cena vs The Rock already booked in for Mania, this still wouldn't have allowed Punk to main event, and thus his biggest grievance with the company would have still stood. Number 9, what if Steve Austin hadn't broken his neck? There are few butterfly effect moments in WWE quite like Owen Hart picking up Steve Austin for that piledriver and not quite getting him set properly. A seemingly innocuous moment, although it'll have felt plenty innocuous to Austin, that changed the company in ways still being felt today. SummerSlam 1997, one piledriver, one broken neck, and the rest was history. This all forced Austin to relinquish the Intercontinental Championship and wrap up his feud with Hart, but given his emerging popularity, the then WWF were determined to keep him around in some capacity. The solution was to start a feud with Vince McMahon himself, whereby he could be kayfabe fired and allow the necessary recuperation time. When he returned to in-ring action, he renewed hostilities with Hart, but the seeds of his rivalry with Vince and his gimmick as the ultimate anti-authoritarian had been sown. After moving on to a critically lauded feud with The Rock, and by 1998 a WrestleMania main event angle with Shawn Michaels, he'd managed to usher in the very Attitude Era that would sweep the Monday Night Wars. Without that broken neck, it's likely Austin and Vince would never have clashed in 1997, and Fox would have just paid billions for the rights to WCW Thunder. Number 8, what if Balor hadn't gotten injured? Yeah, you see, weird one this, because on Finn Balor's first full night as part of WWE's main roster, he defeated Cesaro, Rusev, Kevin Owens, and Roman Reigns clean. Within a month, he was in the main event of SummerSlam and pinned Seth Rollins to be crowned the company's first ever Universal Champion. However, owing to an injury sustained in that very match, he was forced to relinquish his championship after just one day, vacating it to a tournament on Raw, never to hold it again. The remainder of his time on both Raw and SmackDown was mired in the mid-card with a few scant highlights, not enough to stop his return to NXT from feeling like a bit of a relief. But it could have been so different. When he was called up initially, Balor was riding the crest of an unimaginable wave. He was thermo over in NXT, shipped merch at an absurd rate, and could easily have played the technical main eventer role that ultimately went to Seth Rollins. That injury robbed those two men of a summer program together and, in all likelihood, a co-main event slot at WrestleMania for Finn the following year. You see, the Universal Championship ended up being contested between Lesnar and Goldberg at that event, but had Balor still been holding it heading into 2017, it would likely have been the Demon versus the Beast instead. Number 7, what if Shawn Michaels had held back? 2002. Of all the improbable stories in WWE, Shawn Michaels' latter-day comeback still ranks amongst the most unlikely. Written out of the company almost completely after handing the main event torch over to Steve Austin, injuries forced a permanent-looking retirement right before the company was about to explode into the mainstream. He hung around, did the occasional guest spot, but that was it, until it wasn't. His comeback match against best pal Triple H had all the trappings of two friends gently coaxing each other through a match designed more as a vanity project than a serious wrestling endeavor. Hunter would do the bumping, put his ring rusty Bessie over, and that would quietly be that. Except, no, they absolutely battered each other. The hard-to-watch barbarism of SummerSlam's unsanctioned match was a statement that he wasn't only back, but could cope with the rigors of a full-time return. This impressed fans so much that the narrative shifted from "let's just hope he's okay after this" to "put the World Championship on him immediately." 2 months later, the company had done exactly that, and his critically acclaimed second spell with them ran on into 2010. Without that punishing return though, and the praise it drew, he'd likely have remained part-time for the majority. Number 6, what if WWE managed to sign Ric Flair? 1998. It's a story that goes untold in the annals of WWE lore, but the company's original plan for the inaugural SummerSlam was not the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. The plan was to sign Ric Flair from the NWA and build the main event picture around him going forward. This meant a main event match between him and Randy Savage. According to the man himself, "I was on my way to work for Vince McMahon and wrestle Randy Savage at the Garden. My contract was up and Vince McMahon had been in touch with me, but I decided my best move was to remain in the NWA because I was so attached to my friends, the Four Horsemen. I thanked Vince McMahon for the offer, I just couldn't get myself to leave." Now it should go without saying here that A, that was the worst impression you've ever heard, and B, a debuting Ric Flair knocking off Randy Savage could only have led in one possible direction: Hogan in the main event of WrestleMania 5. While this was the 80s dream match fans have historically lamented, it means would have been deprived of the explosion of the Mega Powers and Randy's legendary promo about Hulk Hogan, yeah, and Miss Elizabeth, that's the last one. I'll do no more. Number 5, what if Edge had lost to Cena? 2006. Yeah, dead simple this one. If Cena beats Edge, then Lita doesn't throw the spinner belt into the Long Island Sound and unveil what is, honestly now friends, the best looking WWE Championship of all time. That's it, that's the entry. Number 4, what if the crowd had gone along with Becky's heel turn? 2018. Yes, at SummerSlam 2018, T-Generation X, because yes, that's what they were actually called, imploded. Becky Lynch, seething with bitter resentment that Charlotte had forced her way into a SmackDown Women's Championship match with Carmella and stolen the title from under her, finally snapped. Despite her being the more popular of the two, and let's not forget, well within her right to be annoyed at her overprivileged two-faced worm of a best mate, WWE assumed people would boo this. Instead, she struck Charlotte and the entire Barclays Center crowd in New York cheered. After a pitifully scripted attempt to try and claw some heat back on SmackDown the following week, WWE realised nobody was going to boo Becky Lynch. The subsequent journey she went on as a face saw her develop the man persona and ultimately headline WrestleMania. But if the Brooklyn crowd had just done as they were supposed to that night, or even just been indifferent to the whole thing, none of that would have happened. Instead, Becky would have played second fiddle to Charlotte on SmackDown for the remainder of the year and, crucially, not been leading the pre-Survivor Series charge on Raw directly into the errant fist of Nia Jax. The inevitable Charlotte versus Ronda WrestleMania encounter would have been sensational, but lacking the fan support required to push it to the main event. Number 3, what if the Nexus had won? 2010. Still held up as the ultimate Cena gonna Cena moment in WWE after one of the most explosive collective debuts in the company's history, all 7 members of the Nexus face Team WWE at SummerSlam. This was momentum not seen in a generation, as out of nowhere an entire faction had emerged to dominate every division of the company. A win here would solidify this. However, despite the plan being to eliminate Cena early and hand a win to a rampant Nexus, John Cena himself protested the booking and had it changed to him managing to defeat the group virtually on his own, eventually overcoming being outnumbered and a DDT to the concrete to submit Wade Barrett clean. This, understandably, killed their entire push. Barrett and Cena got embroiled in a strange master-slave thing which made it hard to take either seriously, and by the time WrestleMania rolled around, they diverged to one man being in the main event and the other getting jobbed out to Kane and Santino Marella in 90 seconds. I'll let you work out which was which. Had they stuck to the original plan though, the group would have likely spent the remainder of the year at the top of the mountain, building on this success with numerous title reigns and, in all likelihood, Barrett being crowned the first ever British World Champion. Number 2, what if they'd crowned Lex Luger, 1993. Following Hulk Hogan's departure from the company, Vince McMahon realised he had a problem. His main event picture had a 300-odd pound All-American very vascular hole in it, and if it wasn't filled soon, business was likely to dry up. His solution? Take the otherwise unremarkable Lex Luger, put him in some star-spangled trunks, and presume that fans will love him because patriotism or something. The one hitch with all of this though was that Luger was not Hogan. He wasn't as popular, he wasn't as charismatic, he definitely wasn't as good, and with his presumed coronation at SummerSlam fast approaching, Vince began to get cold feet on the whole idea. Could he really make this pale imitation of his biggest star WWF champion? No, as it turns out, and Luger's count-out victory kept the belt on Yokozuna until Bret Hart was able to snatch it away at WrestleMania. And I mean, God only knows how things would have turned out if Vince had stuck the course. The company would have stuck with the Lex Express and forcibly rammed Luger down the throats of an increasingly dispassionate audience. Presumably, it could only have lasted until WrestleMania, where a dreary late 94 heel turn would have spluttered out and died at the feet of Bret Hart. Number 1, what if Chyna became WWF champion, 1999? Now yes, it would be difficult to compile every single bizarre booking suggestion that's since emerged anecdotally from WWE in 1999, but ranking somewhere near the top was the idea to have Chyna dethrone Stone Cold Steve Austin at that year's SummerSlam. She'd been the first woman in the Royal Rumble, she'd been the first woman in King of the Ring, and riding a wave of popularity that summer, she was crowned number 1 contender to the WWE Championship, with the company almost entirely set on following through. Austin, teetering on the verge of being the industry's biggest star, was proving difficult to work with, and creative wanted to show him who was boss. Won't job for any of the boys, eh? Well, let's see how you feel about a lady instead. While the ramifications for Chyna would have been incredibly positive, Austin's career would have panned out drastically different. Likely carrying a major chip on his shoulder for the remainder of his time in the company, the strained relationship with Vince would have kept him out of the spotlight, and his upcoming break for neck surgery would have seen his return a far more understated affair. Plus, this was the WWF in the Attitude Era. Nobody, and Adam Cleary means nobody, would have ever let him live it down that he dropped the richest prize in the game to a woman. So there you have it, those are the 10 biggest what-if moments in SummerSlam history, read to you by a man who's secretly still wondering if John Cena's spinner belt is at the bottom of the Salt Lake Sound. Let me know what you made of it all in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share and subscribe. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching. I've of course been Adam Cleary, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.